Hello and welcome to Elemental Hardware Enrichment. My name is Aiden and today we're going to be building a toolbox. Before we get started with building, let's go ahead and introduce the supplies that we need for this project. We're going to need a damp rag, a bottle of glue, a hardware tray, some sandpaper, a hammer block, and our safety glasses. Let's go ahead and put those on now. Now that we've got all of our supplies, let's go ahead and open up our toolkit and take out the tools that we're going to need. For this project, we're going to need a hammer. Now that I've got my tools, I can close up the toolkit and get it out of my way. All right, we've got our supplies, we've got our tools, so the next step will be to open up the box and talk about what we're going to find inside. Let's go ahead and open up our box. To do that, I'm going to be using the claw of the hammer and I'm going to be sliding it down the tape where the two box flaps meet to split it open. Once I've split open the tape, I can go ahead and grab the corners and pry them up. All right, we've got our box open, so the first thing we're going to be taking out is some packing paper, and we just want to make sure to open that up and make sure there are no small pieces wrapped up inside of it before we get it out of our way. Now let's talk about the different wood parts we're going to find inside of our box. The first thing I'm going to be taking out are these two pieces here, and these are going to be my end caps. You can see that the two end caps are exactly the same. On one side, they should have some pre-drilled holes for the nails, and on the other side, they have this inset hole here at the top where we're going to set our handle. So we have two end caps. Next, we have these two long rectangular pieces, and these are going to be our long walls. They're exactly the same and they don't have any holes in them. These are our long walls. Next, we have this larger rectangular piece, and this is going to be our base. You'll notice that it has pre-drilled holes cut into these two long side edges, and it also has the Elemental Hardware logo here in the center. The last wood part I'm going to be taking out is our handle, and that's a dowel that looks like this. The very last thing I'm going to be taking out of our box is our bag of hardware. Now that I've got everything out, let's get the box out of our way. I can go ahead and put the hardware bag right into my tray. Now that we've introduced all of our wood parts, the next step will be to talk about our hardware. Let's talk about our hardware. We only have one hardware bag for this project, and that's going to be this bag here with our 1-inch finish nails. Now that we've introduced our hardware and our wood parts, the next step will be to sand our pieces. Let's go ahead and get started sanding. To do that, we're going to need our sandpaper, and we're going to go ahead and set this so that the soft side faces up. We're then going to set our hammer block right across it and fold the edges of the sandpaper over it to form a sanding block. Once we have our sanding block set up, we can begin to sand our pieces. So I'm going to start with one of my end caps, and I'm going to start by focusing on these end grain edges. You'll be able to recognize these edges by the layers in them, and these are actually the cut edges of our piece that are going to be the roughest, so that's why we're going to start there. We want to make sure that we're sanding them in long, even strokes and applying even pressure throughout. So let's go ahead and sand down all of these end grain edges before we move on. Now that we've thoroughly sanded all of the end grain edges, we can lay the piece flat and sand our veneered edges on the top and bottom. All right, we've got one piece done, so now we're going to repeat that process with the rest of our wood parts. Let's get started now. Now that we've sanded the end grain and veneered edges of each of our pieces, I want to go ahead and remove the sandpaper from the block and sand out these harder to reach insets on my end caps. So I'm going to remove the sandpaper, I'm going to fold it into thirds, and I'm going to use the corner of the sandpaper to sand out this area here. Once I've sanded out one, I can go ahead and do the same thing with the next piece. Alright, we sanded all of these parts, but now we need to focus on our handle. So I'm going to go ahead and replace the sandpaper on the block, and I'm going to start by just doing a once over all the way around the handle. Now that I've sanded this edge of the handle, I also want to bevel the top and bottom edges. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sandpaper, I'm going to hold it at a 45-degree angle and place it against the top edge of the handle. I'm then going to move the sandpaper back and forth while I rotate the dowel to bevel it. Once I've got one side evenly beveled all the way around, I can flip it over and do the same thing on the opposite end. I've now got all of my pieces well sanded, so the last thing to do will just be to take my rag and wipe up any dust. Alright, we've got all our pieces sanded and cleaned up, so now we're ready to get started with our build. The first step will be to attach our long walls to our base. Let's go ahead and begin attaching our long walls to our base. The very first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the base in front of us so that it lays flat on our work surface. We're then going to open up our hardware bag and dump our 1-inch finish nails into our tray. From there, we can begin setting an inch-long finish nail into each of the pre-drilled holes on our base. So let's do that now. Now that we have all of our nails set, the very next thing we're going to need to do is grab one of our long walls and set it up onto our work surface so that it stands on a long side edge, just like that. From there, we can remove the red cap from our glue. I'm going to go ahead and put it in my tray so I don't lose it, and then I'm going to lay a bead of glue along the up-facing edge of my long wall. Once I've got the glue on there, I can go ahead and spread it out evenly using a finger. Alright, I've got the glue evenly spread, so I'm going to wipe my finger clean and also use the rag to wipe up any excess glue that may be spilling over the sides. What I'm going to do now is go ahead and set this glued piece just like this so that the glued edge faces up, and then I'm going to grab my remaining long wall and I'm going to set it up in the same orientation about 5 or 6 inches from the glued piece. I'm then going to pick up my base, ensuring that my nails face up. I'm going to lay it right over the top of that glued edge so that the nailed edge of the base rests right over the glued edge of the long wall. Once I've got it in place, I'm going to begin lining it up so the two pieces are perfectly flush. So let's take some time and do that now. Remember, it's important to take your time and double check that your parts are flush before you begin hammering. My parts are at a place that I'm really happy with, so I can go ahead and begin by tacking in the first nail closest to my dominant hand. Let's go ahead and do that now. Once I've got that first nail tacked in, I'm going to want to stop and double check my alignment. Everything's still looking really good, so let's go ahead and finish off that first nail and hammer in the remaining nails. Now, because these nails are on a downward facing edge, it's really important that they sit flush against the edge of the base. So what I want to do is run my finger over each nail to make sure that none of them are sticking up. If any of the nails are sticking up, I can make sure that the head of my hammer is perfectly flat and give them a couple of extra taps. And then we'll do one last check. And all those nails feel really good, so let's go ahead and wipe up any excess glue. Don't forget to check on the inside of the project as well and wipe up any glue in there. All right, we've got that first side attached, so let's go ahead and attach our remaining long wall. Just like we did before, we're going to set this onto our work surface along one of its long side edges and set a bead of glue onto the up-facing edge. Once we've got the glue on there, let's go ahead and spread it evenly using a finger. Just like before, I can go ahead and wipe my finger clean and also wipe up any excess glue. Now that I've got my glue wiped up, let's go ahead and set this piece right underneath the nailed edge of our base. Now it's going to be kind of hard for me to line everything up like this while it's facing away from me, so I'm going to go ahead and flip this around so that the side that I'm working on faces me. And then once again, I'm going to go ahead and start lining everything up nice and flush. So I'm going to take my time doing this. Remember, you want to take your time and make sure your two pieces are flush before you begin hammering. I'm really happy with my alignment right here, so I'm going to go ahead and hold everything in place with my non-dominant hand and tack in my first nail. Now that I've tacked in my first nail, let me go ahead and double check my alignment and make sure nothing moved while I was hammering. All right, I've got my parts still lined up, so I'm going to go ahead and finish off that first nail and then hammer off the rest. Let's get to it. Just like before, I want to go ahead and check all my nails to make sure they're nice and flush. If any of them are sticking up, let's give them a couple extra taps. And now the last thing to do is just to wipe up some excess glue. So let's do that now. All right, I've got my two long moles attached, so we're ready to move on to our next step, which will be to attach our first end cap. Let's begin attaching our first end cap. So I'm going to go ahead and move this off to the side, and I'm going to grab one of my end caps. The two end caps are exactly the same, so it doesn't matter which one you start with. But what does matter is the orientation of the end cap. We want to make sure when we attach this to our toolbox that this inset hole is facing the inside of the toolbox, because that's how we're going to set our handle. So when we're setting our nails, we want to make sure to place this so that the inset hole faces down. So again, double check that that inset hole is facing down before you set your nails. Now we can go ahead and set one nail into each of the pre-drilled holes on the up-facing edge of the end cap. Now that we've got our nails set, we can go ahead and move this piece off to the side, and then we're going to stand up the frame of our toolbox so that we have a U-shaped edge facing up. It doesn't matter if I set it this way or this way, both sides are the same. Once you've got this standing up tall, we're going to go ahead and spread a bead of glue along this up-facing edge. Then we can go ahead and spread that glue evenly. We've got our glue spread out, so let's go ahead and wipe our finger clean, and then we can also wipe up any excess glue. All right, now that we've got the glue set, what we're going to do is go ahead and place our end cap so that this nailed edge aligns with the glued edge of our frame. Now it could be very challenging to line up all three sides of the end cap so that they're all perfectly flush at the same time. So we're going to use a very specific strategy to get this done. What we're going to do is start on one side. I'm going to be starting on one of my short side edges, and you can tell it's the short side edge because it only has two nails. It doesn't matter which one you choose, just turn one of the short side edges towards you and begin to flush up that edge. And we're not even going to worry about the other edges right now, just the one that's facing us. Once I have this edge to a place that I'm happy with, I'm going to go ahead and hold it with my non-dominant hand and tack in my first nail. I've got that first nail tacked in, so I just want to double check my alignment, make sure everything's lined up on this edge, and then I'll finish off that nail and hammer in the second one. All right, I've got both nails on that edge in, so now I'm going to turn it to a long side edge. That's going to be this edge here with these three nails, and I'll go ahead and turn that one towards me. Now with this one side attached, I can still pivot the piece backward and forward along these two nails to line up this long side edge. So I'm going to take some time and do that right now to make sure this long side edge is perfectly aligned. Once I've got it to a point I'm happy with, I'm going to hold it in place with my non-dominant hand and tack in a nail. Once I've got that nail tacked in, I can double check the alignment and then hammer off the next 2 nails and finish my first one. All right, we've got our 2 sides attached, so now we just have one more short side edge to attach. Now with this edge, we're not going to be able to move the end cap at all, but what we can do is rotate the long wall a little bit to line it all up. Now it can be a little bit challenging to get this lined up because as soon as I let go, it's going to pull out of flush. So what I'm going to need to do is line it up and hold it in place while I hammer in my first nail. Normally I would have this facing me while I do it, but I'm going to turn it towards you guys so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to hold it all in place with my non-dominant hand. Let me flip this around a little bit. Hold it in place, and I'm going to tack in a nail. As soon as I've tacked in that nail, I can let go, because now everything's going to be held in place. And now I can just go ahead and finish off my nail. And just like that, I have my first end cap attached, and I can go ahead and wipe up any excess glue. All right, we finished attaching our first end cap, so now we're ready to move on to the next step, which will be to attach the remaining end cap and our handle. All right, we're ready to begin attaching our handle and our last end cap. So we're going to start by setting our assembled toolbox onto our work surface just like this, so that the inset hole in our attached end cap faces up. We're then going to grab our handle and we're going to set a very small amount of glue into this inset hole right here. We don't want to fill the hole up with glue because we want to ensure that there's enough space for the handle to fit. We're then going to go ahead and place the handle right over that hole and give it a couple of taps to set it in the hole. And you may have been able to hear the sound changed a little bit when this was fully set. Now that we've got our handle set, we can move this off to the side and begin to work with our last remaining end cap. Just like before, we want to make sure that the inset hole in our end cap faces down, and then we're going to go ahead and set our nails. Once we have our nail set, we can move this over to the side, and then we can begin to spread glue onto this up-facing edge of our frame, as well as this up-facing edge of the handle. Once we've got the glue on there, let's go ahead and spread it evenly using a finger. Now that we've got our glue spread out, let's go ahead and wipe up any excess using our rag. Now we can begin to set our pre-nailed end cap over the glued edge of our frame. And again, just like before, we want to make sure that the nails are going to align with that glued edge. Now before we do anything, we want to align our handle over the hole in our end cap. And we're just going to kind of line that up and set it in place. Next, we're going to begin to align our end cap. And we're going to do this just like we did before. We're going to start on a short side edge and flush that up. So let's go ahead and begin to line up this edge here. And it can be a little bit challenging with the handle assembled, so just take some time and kind of move it around to make sure it's in the right place. Once you have it aligned to a place that you're happy with, use your non-dominant hand to hold it in place and tack in a nail. Once you have that nail tacked in, go ahead and double check that your piece is flush, hammer off that second nail. Next, we're going to turn to our long side edge. Now we have this edge attached, but we can still rotate along that edge to line up our bottom edge. So let's do that now. And again, this time it's going to try to pull out of flush. So we're going to hold it in place and then tack in a nail. Once that nail is tacked in, it should more or less stand where we want it, but I'm still going to keep holding it until I have my other 2 nails in. And then I can finish off my first nail. Now that we have these 2 edges attached, the last thing we're going to do on this side is attach the last short side edge. Just like before, we're not really going to be able to move our end cap much, but we can kind of move our long wall a little bit to make sure it's all lined up. So I'm going to hold it in place and tack in a nail. Once that nail is tacked in, I can let go, hold from the top, and hammer off both of my remaining nails. Now the very last thing I want to do is just give a tap right over my handle to make sure that that's fully set. All All right, and just like that, everything's set, so we can go ahead and wipe up any excess glue. Okay, and our toolbox is complete. So now the next step will be to get this all finished up and painted, and I'll be right back. All right, I got my toolbox all decorated and I think it turned out awesome. So now I can take it home and fill it up with all the useful tools that I need around the house. I really appreciate you guys stopping by to build this with me on Elemental Hardware Enrichment. My name is Aiden and I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next one.